Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the Institute of Race Relations. I'm Terence Perrigan, Policy and Publications Manager at the Institute, Projects and Publications Manager, beg your pardon. And I'm joined this morning by my colleague, Gerbrandt van Heerden, who has just produced a novel and I would say remarkably interesting study, an in-depth look into the quality of life of LGBT South Africans. Now, why would the Institute choose to look at this? Well, in one respect, it is about the life, the rights, the experience of a part of our society, which in some ways is understudied and misunderstood. Sometimes things being seen very much in stark ideological terms, but there are real stories of real people and real problems. The Institute has been talking about real issues in South Africa since 1929, and we hope to be doing so for, well, until 2129 and beyond, hopefully. So, without further ado, I'm going to invite Gerbrandt to take us through the research work that he's done. Gary, over to you.
Thank you very much, Terence, and thank you everyone for attending our webinar today, where we're going to discuss some of the findings from our report, which we will publish later today. It's titled An In-Depth Look into the Quality of Life of LGBT South Africans. Now, the report has been broken down into various sections looking at LGBT people's experiences in the world of education, healthcare, the workplace, and in terms of how safe the country is. We're also going to look at some of the challenges that transgender individuals face in South Africa. Also, a disclaimer, I'm going to use LGBT as an umbrella term for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, as well as intersex and asexual communities. So please take note of that as well. Right, so South Africa is well known to have one of the most progressive laws in the world. It was one of the first countries to include sexual orientation in its constitution. It was also the fifth country in the world to legalize same-sex marriages. So based on this, when you look at South Africa's progressive constitutional framework, you would think it's a liberal safe haven. And that is why the country has been such a magnet for LGBT refugees in other parts of the continent, because they look at our progressive laws and they see this as a country where they can prosper in a safe and welcoming environment. But do these laws encapsulated in our constitution really trickle down to grassroots level? Well, that's what we're going to look at throughout this presentation. But I first want to look at some international indices that have ranked South Africa based on various indicators. So the first one that I quickly want to take your attention to is the Gay Happiness Index. It's an index that was constructed by an organization in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, which polled over 100,000 LGBT men across the world. And they essentially asked the respondents how satisfied they are with life. And based on that, South Africa ranked as the 41st country out of 127 countries. It basically means that South Africans or South Africa ranks 41st in terms of how happy its LGBT citizens are. And then in another index, the 2019 LGBT Danger Index, this index looked at how safe countries are for LGBT travelers. And once again, South Africa performs very well. It ranks high in the position of 15 out of 150 countries. So these two indices in conjunction with our constitution makes it look like, you know, South Africa is really a safe haven for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender citizens. However, is this truly the case? And one of the big issues that have come out of our study is that we don't really understand the local LGBT community. Polling and research studies are very sporadic, they're infrequent, and data is regularly old and out of date. Status A, our official research, national research institution, has completed their census this year. And in that census, they have failed to adequately cover people with different sexual orientations and gender expressions. So once again, a complete oversight of the local LGBT community. So there's a dearth of information that exists. And due to this, how are we then able to effectively allocate resources in order to improve the lives of queer South Africans? Now, a study that was done by the Inclusive Society Institute in 2020 showed that it's kind of controversial how well South Africa's laws function for queer South Africans or LGBT South Africans. In one polling question, they asked, do you believe these constitutional rights encapsulated in our constitution is adequate to really promote the rights for queer people? And 59% said yes, but 41% said no. So it's almost split down the line about how effectively our laws work for the local community. And then in terms of government departments, there was a question that was asked, do you believe government departments give you fair treatment when it comes to various services? Only 50% said yes, 46% said no. But there is a completely different picture that emerges when we look at the private sector. So that's the pie chart on the right-hand side. And in that question, they asked, do you believe that the private sector gives you fair treatment when it comes to services and their products? And 70% said yes, and 30% said no. So an issue that's already starting to emerge, and that we will get into a little bit later on in this briefing, is that the public sector, and that includes public hospitals, public schools, as well as the South African Police Service, actually fail in many ways to really embody the spirit of our liberal constitution. And that is a big problem because poor South Africans living in rural areas, mostly, they only have access to public schools or public hospitals, for example. Now, when we look at the school environment, what is happening at the school environment? Because that is a very important sector. That is where one starts your life, where you build the not only like the educational skills, but also the life skills to function as an adult. And unfortunately, the school environment still remains a hostile place for school-going LGBT people. A majority of those surveyed by Out LGBT Wellbeing, 56% specifically, said that they continue to experience discrimination, and not just from their peers, but also from teachers and principals. A study done by the University of South Africa showed that at least a fifth of teachers actually act hostile towards their LGBT students. And some of that discrimination also comes from principals. 9% of principals also discriminate. Or openly discriminate against school-going LGBT citizens. And of course, when you can't function properly at school because of bullying, of harassment by both your fellow classmates and by teachers, that's definitely going to affect your school performance, and therefore later on your aspects or your prospects rather for your career. And in terms of the skill level here, we see that when we look at this chart, for example, this chart breaks down, or it has 4 columns. The 2 left-hand columns looks at gender non-conforming LGB or lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, as well as gender conforming LGB people. And then the 2 right-hand columns looks at gender non-conforming heterosexual people and gender conforming heterosexual people. So when we look at the LGB sections, the 2 left-hand pillars, we can interpret this chart in one way, that LGBT people are not as skilled as their heterosexual counterparts. For example, when we look at the second pillar down at the bottom, that dark blue line there, 2% of gender conforming LGBT people are highly skilled, in comparison to 18% of gender non-conforming heterosexual people and 23% of gender conforming heterosexual people that are highly skilled. So there's already that skills deficit that we can see appearing because of the discrimination that people start out with at the school environment. If we, however, look at this chart in another way, for example, we can lump the skills section and the semi-skilled section, the highly skilled section or the semi-skilled section together. Then we kind of see a different picture emerge. We can see that 60% of gender conforming LGBT people are either highly skilled or semi-skilled, in comparison to around 50% of gender conforming heterosexual people. So in another way, you can argue, but hey, LGBT people are actually able to compete with their heterosexual counterparts in terms of skills. But even if we interpreted this chart in that way, it does not, the high skills that LGBT people might have does not necessarily translate into better career prospects, which is what we're going to see in the next section when we look at the work environment. So right off the bat, a study that was done by the South African Social Attitudes Survey, they demonstrated that 2/3 or 63% of gender non-conforming LGBT people are unemployed compared to 40% of their heterosexual counterparts. So already there's a higher unemployment rate for queer South Africans. And then not only are their chances of securing a job less, but a majority of respondents surveyed by the Inclusive Society Institute, or 56%, said that even if they have a job, they often or frequently experience discrimination and homophobia at the workplace. And this graph right here just further illustrates the discrepancy in the levels of employment between LGBT people and their heterosexual counterparts. And then some anecdotal evidence that was gathered by Plus, which is a LGBT business network. Some of the anecdotal evidence that they managed to collate showed that many LGBT business owners will have a successful business. But once they come out of the closet, or once they are open about their sexual orientation or gender identity to the public, they suddenly see a sharp drop in clients and money coming in. And this quote here from Mr. Guma, the manager of Plus, he said that after business owners come out as LGBT, support for their businesses began to drop, showing that there is still high levels of discrimination against our entrepreneurs. And that, of course, has a big impact for the country as a whole. The studies that I've looked at has also shown that along with this discrimination against LGBT business owners and employees, you see a loss of output and a loss of productivity and increased costs. So there's already a huge detrimental impact, economic impact for society at large because of the discrimination that LGBT workers still experience. In terms of safety levels, this country remains a very hostile, dangerous place for the community. The levels of violence actually is far more pronounced if you are a Black person living in a rural province or township area. And about 50% of Black LGBT people that were surveyed by Out LGBT Wellbeing have, or rather know someone who was either murdered for being or suspected of being LGBT. But even though levels of violence are extremely high against this community, they have a high level of mistrust with the police. Only around 88% of victims of hate crimes actually go and report a crime to the police. And the reasons are varied, but one of the main reasons is that many victims, when they go to a police station, the officials there would either laugh at their face, ridicule them further, be extremely unhelpful. And this just adds further trauma to, these individuals that have experienced assaults, sexual assaults, and the level of violence against Black lesbians is so high that South Africa was the country to coin the term corrective rape, which is the act of sexually assaulting a lesbian woman in order to, quote unquote, cure them of their same-sex attraction. And we can also see this in the school environment, a discrepancy between urban provinces and rural provinces. A majority of pupils that go to school in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal have indicated that they have been threatened with physical violence. The proportions are relatively lower for more urbanized provinces, the Western Cape and Gauteng. In Gauteng especially, less than 30% of pupils in Gauteng schools say that they have been threatened with physical violence. So the situation is slightly better if you live in a big city, in a metropolitan city, but your chances of being a victim of violence is much less if you live in South Africa's more urbanized and more economically prosperous provinces. The Eastern Cape, I've also seen, it can, if we look at the data, can be regarded as the most dangerous province for LGBT South Africans. You are more likely to be physically assaulted, sexually assaulted, and murdered in that province, far more than in provinces such as the Western Cape. In terms of the healthcare sector, there, once again, the same that as we've had with police stations, in public healthcare facilities, healthcare workers, nurses will have extremely hostile attitudes once they learn that patients are part of the LGBT community. And if I have my figure correctly, in that social attitude survey that I mentioned earlier, more than 50% of healthcare workers say that having a same-sex attraction is absolutely disgusting. That is a predominant perspective held by workers in the healthcare sector, and of course that's going to affect the quality of healthcare that LGBT patients then receive. Many LGBT people are foregoing necessary health checks. They are not going to the hospital to treat preventable infections, to do cancer checkups. So there is, and there has been many LGBT people who have died because they waited too long to go to a healthcare facility due to the treatment that they still experience from healthcare workers there. And HIV is still a big issue that affects not only South Africans as a whole, but also LGBT people. But once again, there is an urban-rural divide that emerges. Around 10 to 14% of LGBT people living in big major cities are HIV positive. This is according to the Triangle Project, and this is much higher. This is much lower than in rural provinces where the prevalence rate is around 26-34%. So still a real big issue for the community as well. And then, of course, transgender citizens in South Africa, when it comes to healthcare, also have a very difficult situation. There is, up until now, only 9 public hospitals in the entire country that provides hormone replacement therapy. And there has even been a story a few months ago about many transgender people from a small town in Mahikeng, which is in the northwest, complaining that they have to travel literally hundreds and hundreds of kilometers to get to the nearest healthcare facility in Gauteng in order to get the hormone treatments that they desire and require. And also because of the hostility that is very prevalent in many public healthcare hospitals. Many transgender people are having infrequent visits to hospitals and or healthcare facilities, and that leads to an increase in their chances of self-mutilation and using hormones without medical supervision. So basically doing unsupervised procedures on themselves because they're too scared to go to a healthcare facility to go through the proper process. And this one quote from the Williams Institute, it states that nearly half of participants in the study believe, healthcare worker participants in the study that they conducted believe that transgender people are violating the traditions of their culture. And in that same study, the healthcare workers that were polled said that they think that children should not be near transgender people. So once again, just that complete stigma that homosexuality is being equated with pedophilia. That's a narrative that is extremely predominant in not just in South Africa, but throughout Africa. And is often a narrative that is used by political elites to further crack down on the LGBT community and push for more hostile legislation. So the key takeaways from this study is that the public sector in South Africa is especially failing to embody the spirit of our progressive constitution. We see officials in public schools, hospitals, and then of course the South African Police Service still harboring lots of hostile attitudes towards the community. And even if you get a job as an LGBT person, the levels of discrimination at the workplace are still high, and this further leads to a loss of productivity and output in South Africa. And as what we've seen with the issues that transgender South Africans face, it speaks to the misallocation of resources that occur in this country, and that is the direct result of not enough information being available about this community. And then levels of violence, physical violence, still very high, especially if you are your chances of being a victim is very high if you are a Black, poor, and rural citizen. And then also going to the police to report a crime is also not a viable solution often because of the hostility that you will face at those situations. So what we recommend in this paper are the following. We think that it's important that education should take into account sexual orientation and gender identity, simply because there have been studies all over the world that have shown that where sexual orientation is, for example, incorporated in a subject such as life orientation, bullying and harassment declines tremendously, and the levels of safety that LGBT pupils feel in the classroom really heightens. So if we can incorporate educational discussions around sexual orientation and gender identity in at least a subject such as life orientation, that will already go a far way in alleviating the situation for LGBT pupils in the school environment. And this is something that we can do in public schools. Private schools can implement whatever policy they deem necessary or fit for their communities. But I think at least in the public school arena, this is something that should be included. Also, in the same sense, sexuality and sexual health should be included in the healthcare worker curriculum. Healthcare workers need to understand what it means to be homosexual or transgender, and they need to understand the specific healthcare needs that LGBT people require or have in this country. Once again, we need to inform and provide training for teachers, police, and healthcare workers, as I've just stated. And then there is initiatives that we can employ to also create a safer environment for the community. And one such initiative is the Safe Space Initiative. This is something that was piloted in the United States, and it harbors back to the levels of mistrust that exist between queer people and the police. As I've stated earlier, reporting a crime is very unlikely because of the hostility that LGBT people face from the police at police stations. So what the Safe Space Initiative implies or suggests rather is that victims of a hate crime actually go to a familiar place in public, such as a school or a shop or a business, and in that place, that is where you then report the crime that you've witnessed or experienced. This pilot study in the United States has shown that in these mutual safe spaces for reporting crime, where the members of the police and LGBT people meet in a public space to discuss a hate crime, they actually have seen a notable uptick in victims being more likely to report a crime. So initiatives such as that would go a long way in helping people, LGBT people, to communicate the discriminations that they experience in a safe environment. And then, of course, improve data collection and analysis of the LGBT group. And you can use innovative tools to keep respondents' responses anonymous. So that will help or encourage LGBT people to also be more honest about their lives and their orientation, helping to provide accuracy to the data being collected. And using that, the government can then create strategies and allocate resources way more effectively to improve the lives of the community. And so on that note, I will end it there, and I will hand back to my colleague Terence.
Well, thank you. That was that was fascinating, and I think you covered a lot of ground that would be, in a sense, part familiar to observers, but also with a particular inflection that would not. So thank you very much for that. Now, I understand that we are joined by someone with a particular experience that whom we would like to invite to speak to us about this experience. Sorry, can I please, Alex? So let me hand over to Kerry to do the introductions.
Thank you very much, Terence. Thank you, Gerrit. I am Henry Wakam from Rainbow Refuge Africa. I am the founding executive director of Rainbow Refuge Africa, who was previously known as the network of refugees and asylum seekers, LGBTQI plus South Africa. And as an asylum seeker with a lived experience of displacement and member of the LGBTQI plus community, I'm very privileged and glad to be part of these proceedings. Thanks for having me. First off, I will start by saying there's a pressing need of addressing the issues of gender disparity and identity, as well as the LGBTQI plus crisis in Africa, especially in South Africa, which has become my second home. On the personal base, I am from Cameroon. I fled Cameroon a decade ago in 2013 because of persecution and fearing for my life. And due to that cause, I had to seek refuge in the most likely welcoming country. That's why I had to travel all the way from Cameroon to South Africa with hopes that my journey in my livelihood in South Africa will be accepted, integrated, and well received, given the progressive constitution that South Africa is well known for. However, it goes without saying that as much as we can all read about the white paper that needs to be upheld by the Department of Home Affairs and the progressive constitution, we all can agree that the reality of the LGBTQ person in Africa is very precarious, especially when you are a displaced person such as an asylum seeker as myself. The reason of having established this organization, Rainbow Refuge Africa, is in the sense of bringing a sentiment of, or let me say, rather a feeling of belonging and integration for our vulnerable community. Terence, Gerrit, I have to highlight an aspect here. As much as we can all agree that the local community, the local LGBTQI plus community suffers from their issues, which we all are aware of. When it comes to on our side, we suffer from two layers, which is first the traumas of displacement and the experience reality on the ground in the host community. And this all boils down to access to basic services, which all bring us back to the prime, the entry point of our presence in South Africa, which is access to documentation. That has been a big problem. And as per the convention with the UNHCR and as per the Refugee Act, which was amended, I believe, in 1998, yes, South Africa has become safe haven, a place of hope for many people like us that have fled persecution. And yet those amendment or those provision have not been delivered. If yes, only for few. Here we are sitting in limbo, trying to believe that help can be offered, help can be delivered to people of our communities that are still living in precarious situations. So the call right now, call at hands that we need to be able to manifest and implement is to try to create a sense of advocacy and intent in, let me rather insist on the need for an intentional level of work that will foster a sense of integration for displaced community as well as a sense of belonging. And I will go back in saying we all can agree that the crisis of South African realities in terms of the LGBTQI population is quite precarious. We all agree on that. However, we also have to take into account that we having a group of communities such as ours that are coming, fleeing from war. No, I won't say war, but persecution in seeking a refuge in South Africa. So, what is to be done about it? What is to be addressed in that regard? So, this is why Rainbow Refuge Africa has gradually, from 2019, has gradually moved from being a grassroots organization to be a newly registered organization that aim to try to address such issues by not only working this in silo, but trying to create and establish collaborative work ground that will help promote and enhance the work that we all can be looking forward to see in Africa, especially in South Africa, which is well known as a rainbow nation. I believe, in short, in a nutshell, I've introduced the work that we intend on in doing, and along the way, introducing myself. I'm open for questions. Should there be any question? Thank you.
Okay, super. All right. Well, the floor is open. We have already two questions from Ivo Vector. Please, anybody else wanting to pile in, just put your question into the chat, and we'll get to you. Okay, first question: South Africans are largely religious and conservative. Is there any research on the acceptance and success of LGBTQ education initiatives in such societies? I can see it working in liberal urban environments, perhaps, but if most of your population are religious conservatives, I'd imagine strong pushback against some initiatives. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you touch on a very important thing there, and that is that South Africans are broadly a more conservative bunch. But one way in which the Constitution has worked for the LGBT community is that when we, for example, compare South Africa with other African nations in terms of tolerance levels, we've seen that South Africans are far more tolerant towards LGBT people than other African nations. I think, as if I remember the figure correctly, the research from the other foundation found that 51% of South Africans surveyed said that they think that LGBT people should have the same rights as heterosexual people. So it's a slight majority, but it's a majority nonetheless. And it's far more higher than the levels of tolerance that you see in countries such as Uganda or Zimbabwe. But you are right. There are conservative attitudes that are still predominant in South Africa, especially in the more rural provinces. And I think that is also a byproduct of the lack of education and awareness around sexual orientation. And I think the opportunity to have debate and dialogue about these topics are not, the situation is not always conducive in townships or in rural parts of the country. So that is why I have advocated that at least in public schools, the majority of people going, South Africans going to school, they use public schools in rural provinces, rural areas, and if we could, talk about sexual orientation, what that entails in an objective manner in a subject such as life orientation, then you can maybe foster a new generation that is much more open towards people with different identities and gender expression, not see it as something completely strange and abnormal and un-African, which is something that is always touted by many African elites on this continent.
Henry, would you like to express a thought here? I think
you're muted, Henry.
Thank you. I think Gerrit has said it all, and I think there's a concern and a concept and a context that we need to all have here. I will start first off by saying most elite, especially from the public sector in Africa, always think that because the position that they are upholding, they will backlash the situation of the LGBT community as not being African. I will have to answer that by saying same-sex relationship in the history of mankind has always been part of who we are. Somehow we all have developed some sexual behaviors that are not just from the West, as many would like to believe. So yes, same-sex relationship has always been part of our culture in Africa. So the real problem at hand here is for some kind of political agenda and complacency, it's easy to use the statement of LGBTQI plus reality is not African. It's just to fit into the narrative. So it is for us to try to correct it by making sure that we educate the population at large, and especially our leaders from the public sector, by making them understand that as much as they can push the agenda of the LGBTQI plus reality not being African, we are here, we are queer, we are LGBTQI plus, and we are in Africa, so it's really African. Thank you very much. I think that's all I can add to it.
Look, if I could just say something as a bit of an outsider here, I can talk sort of personal experience. My late mother had very strong opinions about this. She was very much one of those conservative religious people. In the 1980s, if you mentioned homosexuality, she would say abomination from God. But as society changed, she changed along. So by the time of her death, about 20 years ago, it was well, it's a bit weird. But we had gone from extreme to moderate. I also know that in Botswana, President Festus Mogae said, and he got a lot of criticism for this, but I do find some sympathy. He said that he wanted to actually dispense with the laws about it, but he didn't think he could take his country with him. So he said police must just not enforce the laws and wait for societal attitudes to sort of catch up. Now, that's perhaps not ideal, but it does allow progress to take place, and at least it can mitigate some of the harms. Okay, the second question: is there any good data locally or internationally to debunk the pedo grooming slur that is often used among opponents of LGBTQ equality? This is an interesting question. I'm not sure if any such information does exist. Perry, maybe let's call you first.
So, if I understand the question correctly, is there any research that counters the pedophilia narrative?
Yes.
Yeah. I have no research that I can, cite in response to that. That is something that I will have to look into myself. What I can say is that in a country like Malawi, they so this was an organization that did a attitude survey or levels of tolerance survey amongst its population towards the LGBT community, and they asked simple question like, what do you think about homosexuality or homosexual people? And the vast majority of respondents in Malawi said that they think it's abomination and people should be locked up, because how can we have predators amongst us? So the emerging point from that study was that the word homosexuality in Malawi was strongly correlated with pedophilia and predatory. So there is absolutely, I can definitely cite information in research there that it is objectively true that vast majorities of people on the continent think that LGBT people are predators and pedophiles. And that has been a very successful narrative in elections and to clamp down on communities. And so the effective way to counter that would be to show information that pedophilia and homosexuality are not linked, And I'm sure that there are studies that do exist, but I have not, looked at those studies myself. But those studies are out there.
Henry, any comment here?
I would like to highlight that there's a huge difference between homosexuality and pedophilia. Pedophilia is an attraction, is a feeling of attraction towards children, and I believe homosexuality is a same-sex relationship between two consenting adults. So we have to draw the line there. And to add on what Gerard just said, yes, that's a misconception that we all have in Africa, thinking that as soon as you identify as a gay, as a homosexual, or as a lesbian, you are most definitely prone to develop those feelings towards children. So I think again it goes back to what you've said, right? There's a need of education, total education, as to what the LGBTQ plus community stands for and what does it really mean. It's not necessarily trying to derive our feelings towards children, but it's an act of 2 or 3 people with consensus to adult, consensual adult. So we have to seize the difference there and highlight that pedophilia is something else than homosexuality. Thank you. That's what I would like to add.
I think my own sense is that the problem is in trying to prove this statistically is you would lack a denominator. You would need some sort of overall how many cases of pedophilia exist, but that you can only get that by if you sort of knew comprehensively how many were occurring. Now, undetected crime is a problem, and I think a lot of this is then driven by high-profile incidents. So one sort of sick individual becomes the focus and is then used to color the understanding of many others, even where they and especially I think where pre-existing prejudices already prevail. Let's go on from another one of our attendees. There's 2 comments which I'd like to collapse into one. Given the conservative, more cultural Africans believing it goes against culture, it would be nice to have more safe spaces like shelters around the country for the LGBTQI community. And there are scores of LGBTQI plus community, also part of the homeless population, who not only live in fear on the streets, but even more so if their sexual orientation is discovered, being even more aggressively victimized. Question about safety, and I think something that also goes with the refugee question, but also let's say sort of internal displacement, where people lose the support of their social networks. It's often forgotten that's a big driver behind actual homelessness. That you simply have no social network to fall back on. Your comments? Let's start with Kerry.
Yeah, I think it's your chances of becoming homeless is much higher if you are LGBT. We often don't have the sufficient support networks, and also it goes back to what happens to you as a child as well, when you experience hostility from your own family, from your immediate household. That increases your chances of mental health problems, of substance abuse. And both these issues, mental health and substance abuse, are some of the leading causes of homelessness and destitution. I will just briefly say that you got to get the basics right. You got to We have the laws. We just need to apply them to create safer environments for LGBT people, and that will then solve a whole range of other problems: unemployment, poverty, homelessness, substance abuse. Yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
Okay, Henry, any comments here?
If I can briefly chip in, yes, it is the need of safety is more than ever needed when it comes to issues of our communities. And this goes through total education and advocacy. We continuously have to advocate and educate the community at large, the population at large, not only on the reality of the LGBTQI plus person, but on the reality of displacement, as Harit mentioned, and also the need of creating safe spaces through establishment of shelters, which we don't have enough in South Africa. And going back to the issue of housing, it is clear that most of us that have suffered from rejection, be it coming with displacement, it's imperative that action being taken to help foster a sense of belonging through effective implementation of housing through shelter support. I think that's all I can add to it. Thank you.
All right. Well, look, you mentioned Henry. You mentioned the question of education that also comes up in Herod's analysis to shift attitudes. And we have a question here. What's your comment on the role played by the media in bringing awareness to the issues faced by LGBTQI plus people? I think that's probably going to be the last question we can field today. So I'm going to hand this over to you as the parting shot. Terry, let's go with you first.
Okay. I think having positive representations of LGBT people in media is first and foremost important. I mean, you can have LGBT characters in shows and movies, but that's not necessarily positive representations. Often or not, especially in the past, a lot of negativity and stigma towards the LGBT community was encouraged due to negative representations of this group in the media spaces. So I think we are becoming a more rapidly developed society. More people are getting access to phones, televisions, social media, and you can reach a wide audience very quickly through media platforms. And I think you need to show positive representations of LGBT people to kind of smash those stigmas and those negative narratives that surround the group. And you also need to use the media to create awareness of the issues still faced by this group, because I think a lot of people, a majority of people don't understand how bad it really gets for many LGBT citizens. So I think if you approach that from those two aspects, you can definitely open up people's eyes to view LGBT people in a different light, and hopefully in a better light.
Okay. Henry?
Thank you very much. I will add on what my colleague has said by emphasizing on one point, which is there's an urgent need of a narrative change in the media, and this can only come by, as I would say, by a positive representation in the media, and most importantly, inclusive policy change in the media, because people writing policies in media, they are not language sensitive. Therefore, the media has become a tool to alienate the LGBTQI plus community, and then fostering a sense of integration. So I believe policy change in regulating the media houses in terms of changing the narrative, it's something that is duly needed. So yes, that's my take on the question, and I hope it adds more to it. Thank you.
Well, like if I may, I would be very very wary about anything that seeks to regulate, because whatever the intentions, once you've passed that power, it's very difficult to claw it back. Just from my point of view, I think that there's an interesting dynamic. I'm old enough to remember the 1980s, and if I remember mainstream dramas on television. Gay characters were often used almost, to signify something transgressive, um, or often associated with HIV. Obviously, a very big issue at the time. By the 90s, you found gay characters coming into sitcoms, being there's sort of a type of fun gay identity. And if you look at a lot of the sort of big media houses and media products now, it's fairly unremarkable. And I think that it's important to bear in mind that change has happened. I imagine that if you had gone into much of South Africa in 1994 and asked these same questions, you would find that the 50% plus who say that they don't really have a problem with it would be far lower. I think it's also important to bear in mind that there are significant differences in life experiences depending on where you live and what your personal circumstances are. The difference between, let's say, Sandton and Ngoma. But for all that, this is these are issues that affect some of our fellow citizens, that affect the quality of our constitutional democracy, and as we see from Henry's participation, the lives of many of our fellows on this continent who look to South Africa for a type of moral and policy leadership. So, yeah, we encourage everyone to have a look at the report. It's on irr.org.za under the reports tag. And please do feel free to be in touch with us to discuss these matters further, or to contact us to arrange for for a media engagement. And with that, let me wish you all the best and a wonderful day further. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.